The first introduction I'll do is my wife, Dr. Narelle Biederman. So we've been married for 25 years. Narelle's actually an accomplished university academic. We met after she'd just joined the Army as a nursing officer at Kapuka in Wagga. And we've been together for the 25 years. Narelle's been a distinguished academic at James Cook University and Federation University. She earned a doctorate in philosophy from JCU, and the topic was about the experiences of Australian Army nurses who served in the Vietnam War. Narelle's written 2 books about military history. One is Tears on My Pillow, about the experiences of the Australian Army nurses who served in the Vietnam War, and the other one, which I'll read the quote from and which Lieutenant Colonel Tilbrook was intimately involved in, is Modern Military Heroes. There's a flyer if you would like to explore the book further. So Narelle currently coordinates a postgraduate program at James Cook University's School of Nursing Science. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Stephen Tilbrook, we've been good comrades throughout our time in the battalion. I've followed his career, so Steve was a platoon commander in Bravo Company 24 RAR. He was a lieutenant with us in Wagga. He came to our wedding. As a captain, his most notable appointment, he was ADC to the Governor-General, Sir Peter Cosgrove. And as a major, company commander in 2 RAR, as a lieutenant colonel, CEO of 2nd 30 Training Group in Malaysia, and the J7 at 1DIV DJFHQ. Currently, Steve's serving with the Defence Cooperation Program in Papua New Guinea, and they've just had COVID issues themselves, just like we have in Townsville. The reason we're here doing the interview as part of 3 Brigades Leadership and Ethics Conference on behalf of the Cove is to talk about what happened in Rwanda in 1995, the actions for which Steve was awarded the Medal of Gallantry. I'd like to read the citation for Steve's Medal of Gallantry. Lieutenant Thomas Stephen Tilbrook is cited for the Medal for Gallantry for his acts of gallantry while commanding the Infantry Protection Force at Kabayo, Rwanda, during the massacre of civilian refugees in April 1995. As the Infantry Protection Commander, Lieutenant Tilbrook was responsible for the security and protection of the Australian Medical Support Force at Kabayo. This responsibility included the disposition, deployment and coordination of the infantry force, the coordination and tasking of support for the medical team, and liaison and negotiation with the Rwandan Patriotic Army forces. The fighting that erupted on 22nd of April placed the Australian Medical Support Force under intense pressure and immediate physical danger. The camp population made 2 attempts to escape from Kabayo. The first attempt occurred at 1100 hours and resulted in the death of approximately 130 people. The second attempted escape occurred at 1710 hours and resulted in the deaths of thousands of people and an overwhelming number of casualties. Throughout the entire crisis, Lieutenant Tilbrook displayed outstanding leadership and personal courage. His decisive leadership, clear orders, consistently accurate assessment of the situation, and personal example maintained the security of the medical team, allowed the evacuation of humanitarian workers and more than 500 casualties, and ensured that the medical team could continue to operate throughout the entire period of the crisis. On a number of occasions on the 22nd of April, Lieutenant Tilbrook led his team into the camp to evacuate the wounded, often while small arms fire was impacting around them. When advised that 3 humanitarian workers were separated and alone in one of the camp buildings, Lieutenant Tilbrook immediately led a small team to rescue them, again while firing was continuing. On the morning of the 23rd of April, Rwandan Patriotic Army troops began a sweep of the hospital in the camp with the intent of clearing the hospital. Lieutenant Tilbrook was able to negotiate successfully the evacuation from the hospital of non-walking casualties who otherwise would have been forced from the hospital regardless of their wounds. Lieutenant Tilbrook's acts of gallantry and leadership were crucial to the success of the Australian Medical Support Force's operation at Cove. That success has reinforced and enhanced the reputation of the Australian Medical Support Force, the Australian Defence Force and his country. His personal courage, leadership and dedication to duty were in the finest traditions of the Royal Australian Infantry Corps. With that, I'll hand over to Narelle to commence the interview with Steve.
So let's start firstly with what led you to RMC in the beginning.
That citation that Tom just read out, it's one I haven't read through for a long time, and it sort of hits home again about some of the themes that I'll be hopefully being able to reinforce today. But I want to start up front by saying that if it had been my choice, every one of the Australian soldiers who were at Cove on that day would have been decorated. And I wear that decoration with a lot of pride, but I wear it on behalf of the whole team that was there. So it is a team game, and certainly in the room there's one very close mate that I consider a close mate who can vouch for the good work that was done across the board. So, sorry, back to you, Narelle. I just wanted to add that up front, please.
So let's talk about in the early years before you went. What did you go to RMC? What were you looking for?
I had actually, it's a bit of a long story. I've got a military family, so I'd always had an interest in the military. My grandfather had served in the Second War. My father had served as a police officer, and it was always something I was very interested in. I had applied earlier to go to the Defence Force Academy and actually received a scholarship to do that. But my social activities and rugby probably got in the way of that a little bit, and I ended up going to university in Brisbane for a year and a bit before I joined at RMC. I worked out pretty quick once I was at uni that I knew where I wanted to be, and that was to be in the military. And I ended up reapplying to go to Duntroon straight out of that location, and fortunately was accepted. So I'd say it's probably something that it's hard to describe, but all of those of us that serve, you have that. It's very difficult to describe what it is, but there's a drive in you, and I guess I had that all along. So it was bound to be, perhaps.
Sure. After RMC, let's talk a little bit about that posting, that first posting that you had from RMC. Where did you go, and what were your first thoughts in that posting?
So as Tom sort of opened up about there, and by the way, he probably owes me more than the one that I took from him, but I was fortunate enough to be allocated to the Infantry Corps, which was my first choice. It's where I wanted to go, and then on top of that, I was lucky enough to be allocated to the 2nd 4th Battalion, which at the time was part of the Operational Deployment Force, and then later the RDF, which was the Rapid Deployment Force. For those of you that haven't been around in the system as long as some of us, in those days, 3 Brigade was the high readiness element of the Australian Army, the line element, and we were kept at very short levels of notice for MOV to react to and respond to any requirements of the government. So I marched into the 2nd 4th Battalion and basically went straight online in that capacity and into Bravo Company and 4 Platoon as the OC of 4 Platoon. So the scenario, I guess, or the atmospherics in 3 Brigade, certainly in those days of being a high readiness element, were all about work. and everything that we did was towards maintaining that high readiness and the ability to move rapidly to support any government decision in internal and external deployments. So our whole focus was about that. Luckily, I came into that organisation in 4 Platoon and within Bravo Company particularly. I had a very strong leadership team with the company commander and the CSM at the time. And I had a very experienced and very capable team within the platoon that were well established there. Current RSM 3 Brigade was one of the section commanders there. And the team was a well established, as I said, and well proven team. The year I had first year in the battalion was a very busy one. We had some great training opportunities that we undertook, and it was a very full training program, including a trip to New Zealand on an exchange program with the whole company. We did rotations through Tully and a full brigade and battalion readiness cycle through that readiness process. So, for a young platoon commander coming into the organisation, it was an exceptional experience, a very steep learning curve, but an excellent opportunity to understand the team that I was allocated to and working in, understand the strengths and weaknesses in that team, and to test myself in some pretty robust training scenarios and situations, all under the close tutelage of a strong company commander who kept a pretty tight rein on us. So I'd say, looking back and reflecting, it was a brilliant experience. It's one that, that first year particularly is one that you couldn't ask for a better start as a young platoon commander.
So it sounds like it was an intense period of development to go from that training to be a junior officer to actually becoming a junior officer and all that entailed. So keeping that in mind then, when the deployment became evident, what did you know at that point about the deployment to Rwanda? How much notice were you given, and how did you prepare yourself for that?
So to start with the first point, I think, absolutely, the transition from the training establishment into a line high readiness unit, it wasn't a seamless transition. I had a lot of lessons reaffirmed and relearnt through the experience of the individuals around me, and I think, but the important piece there was to make a point about that is that that the training system and the training establishment prepared me as well as any could. It gave me the tools and the background to be able to reflect on lessons and be self-critical and but more importantly to learn from others and be able to take that on board. So, as I said, I had an extremely strong command team in that platoon, and I learned a lot off all of the individuals. With regards to the deployment itself, we had a pretty or comparatively long turn up for that. So for those who are students of military history, you understand that we were committed to that operation in my first year as a platoon commander in 24IR, about in mid-year of 1994. An Alpha company from the battalion was selected to go and form the core of the security force that went across with the 1st Medical Force. So we had a heap of our mates and brothers already in location in country. Having said that, the communication systems aren't what they are today, so we didn't get a lot other than the formal reporting back, and then the odd personal correspondence that were actually handwritten letters. It's that long ago. So we'd had a fair bit of background on it, but not near the expectation that you would see today on force preparation for anything like that. So we were notified. It wasn't clear straight away that there would be a second rotation. The Australian government had kept that option open, and we were informed probably it was towards the back end of 1994 that we would deploy in the new year to replace the Alpha Company contingent on the first contingent that had gone across. So we had a pretty good lead time. It wasn't within the readiness notice. It was a couple of months' notice, and we did have some time to do some thought around the deployment and try and gather a little bit more information. But it was back right onto the Christmas leave period as well. So, we didn't have a lock-in or a mission-specific training activity as such as you see these days. But our year from the previous year of hard training had prepared us pretty well, and we were pretty confident across the board that we were well set to deploy.
Okay, so then tell us then, what were your thoughts when arriving in Rwanda?
It's hard. It's sort of reflecting back. Like the initial thoughts was, about sights and sounds and smells that I was seeing. It was all of us. I think were there was a mixture of enthusiasm and excitement and probably a tinge of uncertainty and perhaps fear about what to expect. They were all emotions that I think everyone was running through as we flew in. Knowing that we had a foot on the ground already was reassuring, and knowing that we'd have time, albeit short, to talk to our team that was already on the deck there was reassuring for sure. But initially, again, it was the sights, sounds, and smells of the place. I was struck by the beauty of Kigali, of the rolling hills and the terraced housing and farms that were small plots of small crops that were in and around the city. It was bustling. I mean, there was people on the street and there was activity going on. So it was all of your senses were excited as we sort of moved in. Once we got into our accommodation over at the former Rwandan Defence Academy and had an opportunity to start talking with our colleagues there. Very, very quickly tuned to trying to extract as much information out of that team as possible, listening to their stories, listening to the things that were difficult for them and the issues that they had been involved in, and the incidents that they'd had to deal with whilst they were there. So all of that background face-to-face stuff was very helpful in getting us sort of in the right mindset. But then we also had a very clear commander's intent outlaid to us from our CO of the contingent, that he wanted to display that the contingent had changed and that was a different team in town now. So he had his own reasons for doing that, but there was very much about hitting those key directed milestones that we needed to do and then getting on the job. For those who have done recent operations, the handover takeover in country was less than 24 hours. So it was a pretty short period and a lot different to the way we do things now. So we pretty much sat up all night and ran those questions and answers with the team that was outgoing. And the next day we were on the job. We had replaced the team that was there in securing the hospital, which was separated from our accommodation area up at the academy, only by a couple of 100 metres, but it was separate. So we'd move straight in and occupied the hospital security requirements there. And as the medics and doctors fell in on an operating hospital to take over holders bolters. And then the rest of our team then went in and secured the barracks as well as a second task. And then the third element, the third platoon of the company moved straight onto the ready response group requirements and stood to in short notice taskings for response in and around Kigali in support of the UN force and our force and the broader UN force.
Were there any stages in that early part where you were questioning or wondering about your capabilities?
Oh yeah, I think that's a natural thing to do. Again, anyone who has had the opportunity to deploy on an operational tour, I think that's a natural question to ask yourself. Certainly there was a real want to test myself in this circumstance and an unknown until that test was presented. There was never a clear path or understanding of how I might respond to a critical incident or issue, and as importantly, the rest of the team. But what I was confident in was that the work that we'd done in the lead up. I was confident in the strength of the team that I'd deployed there with and the capabilities of the team. I was very comfortable that I had a good understanding, a deeper understanding of each of the individuals in that team and their strengths and weaknesses. And as I alluded to before, certainly some of my strengths and weaknesses had been pointed out to me in the previous robust training cycle that we'd gone through. So, I was not apprehensive. I'd say excitement was probably the key piece, but I was confident as well. But that's not to say there's not doubt around how things might go if the situation turned anything other than stable and good.
What we might do now is we might just move forward into April. So let's talk a little bit, you talk a little bit about the sort of work that you were doing in April leading up to 18th of April when it was becoming more evident that things were going a little bit astray. Can you tell us about that April period?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'd actually been slated for my first leave. So we had a pretty routine time up until April. There'd been a few little flashes and security concerns and issues, but in the whole, it'd been a pretty routine transition of responsibility. As I said, we hit the ground running, but we very quickly established a strong presence in and around Kigali and then further afield. So leading up to April, we'd had a bit of a look around the country. We'd done some smaller deployments outside of Kigali in support of the medical teams that were moving around. And then, so we had, starting to get a bit of a feel for the place and an understanding of, who we were there supporting and what the potential threats and risks might be. But April, as you point out, was a sort of a crescendo of actions and activities that had commenced, up to 12 months earlier, since the back end of the original genocide that occurred in Rwanda. There had been a very large internally displaced persons issue in Rwanda. A number of very large IDP camps had been established around the country. And these were of concern to everyone who was in there supporting. They were difficult to resupply and keep the supplies up to for those organisations that were trying to do that. They were very, very complex places for the medical teams to have to work in, and the living conditions in those IDP camps were very, very basic, and they were susceptible to disease and other ailments that come with that close living. So there was a real want across the board, and not to, at least the security situation. They were of concern to the Rwandan government that had been appointed once the RPA had pushed the RGF out of power. The RPA had established a want to close these IDP camps down and wanted them to, for the people in them to either move on or move back to their place of residence, partly to start re-establishing some normality inside the country, but also to go after a number of the accused individuals that participated in the genocide, in the previous year. So there's a lot of tension around that. Obviously, the people in the camps were concerned and worried about returning, and there was a resistance to do that through a number of other efforts that had gone on earlier. There was a big operation that was conducted by the previous contingent. They participated in that, and a whole UN push to try and move some of the IDP camps and close them down, and that had not been successful. And had resulted in a number of security incidents that we knew had occurred. But we sort of got wind in that third week of April that this was going on again, or the second week into the third week. So as I said, I'd actually been slated for my first leave opportunity in, out of country, and was all set to go and do that. We'd commenced a rotation of FE back to into Kenya to partake in a 72-hour leave in that location, and I was pretty much looking forward to doing that. It had been a pretty busy couple of months, and I was looking forward to the opportunity to go with a couple of mates. The OC had released all three platoon commanders to go and do that at the same time, so I was pretty keen to get out there with Tom White and Chris Smith and just relax for a little bit and have a couple of beers. But the OC grabbed me on the way out, literally, and sort of said, know that this is going on and it's your team that's about to be pushed down there. Are you comfortable with that? And it didn't take me long to make a decision to change the leave opportunity, and because I knew that something bigger than what we'd been doing was about to take place. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I made the election there, and then to postpone my leave and stay on and move with the team. We were sort of briefed into again, very limited sort of background. We knew that the largest camp internally to Rwanda at the time was Kabayo. We knew that it was plus of 100,000 people in that camp, and we got word that was the focus for the RPA to move down there and close that camp down through negotiation or otherwise. So the decision was made to deploy a medical force in support of the UN troops that were down in Kabayo, and many sort of overlooked this piece, but there was a Zambian company on the ground in Kabayo as part of the UN force. They had very limited medical support in that location, and ours as the whole of force medical support organisation, was tasked to go down and provide some support to them, and incidental support that could be arranged for any of the IDPs that might need that on occurrence. So we went as we were warned out to go as a protection element for that medical support team that we were sending down there. And Carol Vaughan Evans and her team on the medical side. There was myself and two sections. One was Brian Buskell's, and the other one was from five platoon section that we were augmented with, because my other section that wasn't on leave was off and about with the legal officer with Irish O'Halloran, my platoon sergeant at the time. So went down with an understrength platoon to go and do the job, and our key role in that was making sure that we were protecting the personnel in that medical team, so that could focus on looking after the business at hand that they might have to be dealing with in that situation. So from that was all that happened pretty quickly. That was all sort of over a 24-hour to 36-hour period that we from flash to bang with regards to the task coming out and us rolling out. I hadn't been down in the south of the country. I think we'd had one limited run down there previously by another call sign. So it was all sort of new ground where we were heading to, but we knew that there were other UN bases established down in that area. And as I said, the Zambian battalion had responsibility for that broader AO and had a nominated company group at the Kabayo location. So we did some pretty quick preparations and got set. The company commander made the decision to deploy with the broader group initially, just to get down and established in that location. And the plan was to when available, marry up with my other section that was in location down in that area under the platoon sergeant and with the legal officer who were doing some work around the genocide investigation at the time. So we other than that, we had very scant understanding of what facilities were available and where in fact we could stage out of, and we sort of had a rough plan that we would leverage off the Zambian footprint down there and operate from their compounds to and into the camp where and when as we were required. So all very unknown, I guess, is the key there. And but that put us down in that location where we had planned to go directly into the camp, establish communications with the UN team there and the other agencies that were operating there, and get a feel for the situation and what was happening, and then to extract each evening to another Zambian compound that was a little ways north of Kibaya, where we would establish a firm base location and then project from there. So that all happened. That went well. We got down into the camp itself. We were struck when we entered the camp, I think, by the size of it, the enormity of the location. It was just unbelievable how many people and how many structures, small temporary structures, had been erected, and how large the camp was. You were driving through it for what seemed like hours until we got into the centre of what was the original missionary location and church and small village that was known as Kibaya. But the other thing that struck us, I think, pretty much straight away was the fact that the place was empty. So we had the briefings that we'd been given that there was over 100,000 people in this camp, and that was clearly evident by the structures and whatnot. There were that many people, but there was just no one around. There was a lot of the temporary accommodations had been burnt down. There was evidence that people had left quickly. So we weren't really sure at all about what was going on and what had happened. We're sort of discussing that maybe we were too late, that we'd missed the opportunity to get in there and support, and that perhaps it had already been cleared out. But as we got into the centre of the camp around the missionary location, the mission location and the church, it was evident then what had occurred. The RPA had commenced the clearance operations into that location and had cordoned the area and swept through and basically herded everyone up onto a centre ridgeline that ran along the axis of what was the little village that was Kibaya there, and there's a number of small structures along that ridgeline, but they'd herded the whole of the camp into that location. And had commenced their own form of screening and removal of individuals from that location back along the track to the north. So we'd come in sort of from another approach into the town, and they were moving them out on the northern track up to the next major town of Batari, which is a little bit north. So so it was a bit of a surprise to see that the situation had developed that rapidly and that they'd moved quickly. But we adjusted and we got established initially on the far side of the camp where the processing was being conducted by the RPA in an abandoned house there or small hut. We set up a perimeter there and sort of tried to establish our own footprint that was securable in that location. And then we attempted to provide some support to the Zambians on the ground and the other agencies that were operating there in the medical team getting up and onto the case. And there was, as you can imagine, a queue of 100,000 long getting pushed along through this processing piece. There was a fair bit to do. So the medical team was busy straight away. We sort of started planning then as to a more supportable location where we could operate from, and we had getting a feel for what was going on in the broader camp at that stage. And I think the tension was clear in the air there at that time, and as the people in that camp had been surprised, I guess, by the move that was made that morning to round them up onto the track. But that first day was pretty much, there wasn't too many significant issues, and there's some hard-handed activities that the RPA were undertaking, and there was clearly fear amongst a lot of the IDPs that were being pushed along and processed. But we weren't restricted or I didn't get the feeling that we were going to be, targeted by anyone at that point. It was just another agency that had arrived and started operating. So we sort of planned then to where we could continue to support and then touch base with the Zambians in location as well, just to make sure that we were tied in with them. And that all sort of went pretty well. Did you want me to go on from there, or?
Well, I guess, could we talk a little bit about the day then of the massacre and when things started to go very wrong? Let's have a talk about that, and I guess from your perspective as a platoon commander, let's explore that from that perspective. What were you thinking, and how were you seeing it as a platoon commander?
Yeah. Okay. So constantly taking in on what was happening in the situation at that stage. I had the benefit of having the OC on the ground at that stage, which was a great reassurance. We had a very, very good relationship. We did in fact meet up with my platoon sergeant and the legal officer at that point as well, or thereabouts, and so him in the area was the team was more complete than running without them. The OC did make the decision or in fact, I think he was directed to be recalled back to Kigali, and he did depart at some point along that piece. And then same for the legal officer, which required an escort, and then my platoon sergeant, Irish O'Halloran, had to move with that group as well to make sure that party was secured in the route back to Kigali. So that pretty much left the two sections that I had with me and the rest of the medical team and support pieces that were allocated in location. I guess, so the scenario-wise, things were changing, and you could tell that, and it's probably understandable. It is definitely understandable that many people crowded into a very small area with that much uncertainty around it. There's going to be all sorts of reactions to that, individual and group. And that was clear that was starting to ripple through the group, the IDPs, as they were waiting for more than 24 hours now to be processed. There was clearly a shortage of water and food into those pieces. So our support to other agencies that were trying to get those elements into the IDPs was clear that we had a role there that we could support and help with. We started some work around that. There was also, at that time, there was some discussions around some rumours and then in fact around some mass killings that had occurred potentially before we arrived there. There was a task then to dispose of those bodies appropriately for health reasons that needed to happen pretty quickly. So that part of the team got involved in that pretty quickly. And, for me as a platoon commander, it was all about trying to read the situation and anticipate what sort of activities the team might need to become involved in, what things they should be and what we couldn't be by ROE and restrictions that we'd had placed on us. So that was an ongoing discussion, particularly then with Buzz and the other section commanders that was on the ground with me. Obviously, support to Carol Vaughan Evans and her team was a clear task, and one that was of the highest priority, and the protection of that medical team was always in the foremost of my mind. So any activities that anyone else in the group were wanting to undertake had to be considered and ensure that we had the right mix in support of them. But it was, really about just trying to stay connected with what was happening and what was developing, and having a plan in place discussed with my command team about what we could and couldn't do and what capacity we had in that regard. And always, with a view of keeping the worst case scenario in mind, what would our response be at any given time to any sort of flare up. So I don't think any of us anticipated what was to occur, but we certainly had thought about what we could do and what we couldn't do if something did go wrong. So securing our team and assisting with the broader UN team was clearly a priority in that. once that that was sort of taken care of and we got into a routine, we did move across to the other side of the compound, which was a more securable location, and established ourselves there, tacked onto what was the Zambian headquarters, company headquarters location there. It had a very rudimentary barbed wire fence around it, around the car park area that had been flattened and reset a couple of times. But it at least gave an area that was clear of being inside of the mass of people without any sort of obstacle or separation. And it gave us, more importantly, an area for Carol and her team to set up a triage area, because at that stage we're starting to see more and more blunt trauma and machete wounds presenting, and Carol and her team were very busy in starting to deal with those as they presented. And the team, of course, then shifted to not only protecting but also assisting some of those medical personnel in moving out into the crowd and retrieving some of the more significantly injured personnel and having them brought back to Carol and the team to be looked at. But we were busy in that routine, and the RPA were continuing to process the personnel out as they saw fit. And we had a few interactions with them there in doing that, and at that stage they weren't threatening, I'd say, to us, but they were still set and very focused on what they were trying to achieve in there as well. But that was that was how we sort of were able to operate then for the next day or so, and it wasn't until the morning of the first massacre that the heightened tension was experienced, and I think that's a couple of days into those poor souls being pushed in such an uncomfortable environment with so limited resources. I know that the stories there of our lads being exposed to that, seeing mothers picking corn kernels out of feces to try and reboil in muddy water that they'd captured off some of the tarpaulins to give their kids to feed. So it was a pretty grim scenario for those people. I think the RPA were becoming impatient with the slow flow of things as well. So there was a bit of as you spoke to the pressure cooker, the pressure was certainly rising, and it, as all pressure, it needs a release somewhere, and that came in that first response from the IDPs to try and break out from the camp and run into the open fields, and at that time, again, we worked worst case scenarios. I hadn't anticipated that the RPA would respond the way they did, but we got a pretty clear understanding once that happened that they were prepared to fire upon these unarmed civilians and do it wholesale. And again, my thought process there was about again trying to stay on top of the situation, be decisive in decisions that I was making, but do that in a consultative way and ensure that my subordinate commanders had the opportunity to express their same scan of the environment, and I'd take that into consideration. But then being decisive in making decisions and adjustments to the plan, and ensuring that that we were continually reviewing the situation in that regard. So, all of that, and then obviously keeping the higher command element advised of the situation as well was another focus of mine, to ensure that my CO, who was the only lifeline that we had, that he was up to date with what was going on and what we were experiencing on the ground. But yeah, it was multiple things going on, keeping them in hand, but ensuring that we had the right people in the right place to do the right things at the right time. That was a pretty it kept you pretty busy in that decision making. Certainly, once that that first wholesale breakout occurred, and the RPA commenced firing upon the crowds, both those escaping and then back into the crowd. My number one thought and priority around that was for protection of the team, to make sure that we were as secure as we could be in that first instance. And you know, as I said, it was pretty basic where we were established, but it was the best spot I think that we could have been in the area. And then it was about making decisions around how we supported additional requirements from the medical team. You know, people with now gunshot wounds in large numbers, and managing the flow or the access for the medics to get out to those personnel whilst there was firing still going on. Understanding and appreciating that it wasn't just one-way fire, that there was two-way engagements that were ongoing, and it was clear then that there was a fairly large what we called intra-harmway or rebel element that was inside the camp that was still armed and were prepared to engage the RPA. So it was pretty confused, but it was, you know, it was clearly about ensuring that we could, you know, stay on top of the situation, stay secure in our movements and be decisive in our assessment and decision making. And that's where it was really, you know, wholly focused on. And that ran right through the morning. You know, there was a lot of other emotions that come into it there, but I was very mindful that the whole situation was confused, and the last thing we wanted to do was add confusion to that. So I sought clarity where I could, and I ensured I tried pretty hard to try and stay, to stay as calm as I could possibly be, and hoped that, and saw that also had a calming influence on the team, and certainly I got that back in spades from the team across the board. And again, it reflects back to the good preparation I think that we did. It was there was a certain degree of trust already established there, that I knew the team members pretty well and they knew me, and we knew how to respond to each other's requirements there. I trusted the team completely. I had no doubt about any member of the team that I was operating with, and I hope and trust that they had that same trust in me. But it was a confidence in knowing that once the decision was made, that every individual in the group, because we'd prepared well and we'd focused on that solid preparation, that they would respond in the right way, and they did it. They did absolutely everything and more than what I asked of them in each of those requirements. The team, as being an established team, they were able to feed back important information to me in a rapid way, in a timely way, that I could make decisions ahead of being reactive. So we could have got on the front foot a little bit there and got ahead of the decision process, and were able to anticipate next moves, and that stood us in good stead through that day, and particularly then once the main breakout occurred, and in points where we were sort of completely overrun in the compound, and the chaos and confusion that was that ensued post that. We had talked through what our reaction to the worst case scenarios were. We knew where our fallback lines were, and where our last stand was going to be made if we needed to. We knew that the essential pieces of kit for us was our way in and out of that location, which were light-skinned 6V vehicles that we had at the time, and were the helos that we were able to get in and out up until a point during the day. As would have it, the worst of the day came when we were spread the thinnest, and the response that we were able to do through just good communication prior to the event was a testament to the fact that we were able to put the right plans in place, and people knew those. I think at one stage there, Brian and the small team were up securing the landing zone for the helos just before they stopped flying, because the firing was too substantial across the LZ there. But Brian and a small team had gone up to escort a stretcher team to evac a couple of casualties. I had Brian's 2IC on the deck with me back in the actual compound, securing two sides of the compound that were the most direct access for personnel, people outside of the wire in the IDP area, and some of the inter-harmway that were there. And then once the wholesale shooting started onto the people inside the compound, and as the masses tried to break out, the people naturally swarmed in to try and seek refuge with us. That created its own security issues that we had to deal with on the fly, but fortunately we were able to reconsolidate around the vehicles, reset the small force that we had in location there, and clear the compound sufficiently to be able to regain a positive security stance in there, and stop being reactionary, get back on the front foot and be proactive about where we were. And then it was about, managing the situation as it developed. And it was, there's a point there where all the planning in the world you can do, and all of the wargaming and considerations are overtaken by events, literally, and then you are being reactive to the situation. But we're able to continue to react, I guess, faster than the situation was able to develop. And, we were able to execute a number of different activities in there around not only security of the location that we were in and the team that we were with, but also in assisting in continuing in evacuating casualties that were obviously increasing by the minute as that situation unfolded, right through to being able to put sufficient posture together to threaten the RPA in a physical sense for them to stop doing what they were doing in at least in the local areas that we could get to. So there was still a lot going on, and but by that stage we shifted to understanding that the whole situation. I'd been informed that that the helos would no longer fly in. That was not viable for them to get into the LZ that we had been using, and that the UN pilots that were operating those aircraft weren't prepared to come back in close to where we were because of the amount of small arms fire that was being experienced, which was a fair enough call. I'd also been told by my CEO, Dolly Roach, that he couldn't get anyone else to me quickly. He was sort of hoping to get a support element mustered together and down to us as quick as he could, but that was, we knew at that stage that was probably at least 12 to 18 hours away. So it was that point that, really I knew that we were on our own, and then things started, sort of working towards self-preservation from there. So working out how that we can continue to look after what we were doing, but also be in a position to be able, and I think about that point, we sort of talked about in extremis, we had a plan to fight our way out if we needed to, which I had a difficult manoeuvre to undertake, but it was a plan, and it was one that had been discussed and it was understood. And we also had varying degrees of looking for opportunities to potentially extract ourselves when we could. And the other one, the option was obviously to sit it out and wait in location. So, we continued. That it was all about continuing to review the situation and then try and stay on the front foot with the decision making.
So let's just think now from a wider perspective. What can people watching this today take away to do to prepare them for leadership under adversity?
I think it gets back to some of the stuff I've been sort of talking about. Preparation is everything. As I said, I'll go back to the start where I was talking about the opportunity I had in that first year as a platoon commander, as to, with the experience that I had in the team and the individuals that I had in the team, and a very focused and professional group. The preparation that we did in those readiness checks and those training and exercise opportunities that we undertook, it was all about setting very high standards, checking on those standards, and ensuring that we were, across the board, being able to meet the standards that were at a minimum required to do the work that we're going to potentially be thrown out the door to do. It was about forming the relationships and the trust in the groups that within the team. So, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the individuals, and understanding my own strengths and weaknesses, being comfortable with being critical of performance and with a view of improvement. So that positive criticism that leads to improvement in performance. And a development of that trust that I knew that if I gave direction, I firstly knew that the discussion and in the decision-making process would be robust and would be honest. But I also knew that once the decision was made, it'd be executed to the letter, to the best of that individual's ability. And I had trust in that. I had very strong trust in that. I had great confidence in the command teams within the platoon through that hard work and how I'd seen them operate. And the skill sets of every individual in the platoon, they were trained well, and they were prepared well, and they responded well. I think that's something that can't go without sort of noting. I guess the other pieces that I'd say in preparation, it's a human endeavour that we undertake, so it is about human interactions, and the relationship with my OC was a very good one, and again one that he taught me a lot in a very short time, and I was able to improve as a platoon commander significantly in the lead up to the deployment, and take on board those lessons. He had an approach where it was about learning, although some of the lessons were tough. That was the way things were in those days, but that was, it was all about improvement of the team and getting the most out of the individuals and the group across the board. Again, the trust that Dolly Roach put in me, but that was built through a very short concentration and very few interactions, to be honest, with the COD, the platoon commander at that time. A couple of social engagements, and then occasionally when he got out to see us doing something. But the ability to communicate openly and freely with him and have him accept the assessment that I was making on the ground as accurate and true, and to know that he was doing everything he could to organise support and perhaps get some additional support to us when possible. That that was all part of it. But it all goes back to just good preparation, and good preparation is good training, and good training builds teams, and in building teams you get to know individuals and understand each other better, and that's where the time was invested, and that's what paid off in due course.
All right. Thank you for that, Steve. I think we have the opportunity now for the people here to ask you questions, if they have any.
It would be remiss if there's anything that Brian wanted to add at this stage, or please, mate, come up the front and we've done these group and answer things before. I'd be happy for you to join me in answering and perhaps give a little different perspective, mate. The story doesn't change. We both lived it. All of our mates that were there with us lived it. It's been written down beautifully by some. Narelle's documents that she's developed, and by others who have been a little bit critical at times, and perhaps that's okay too. But it's always good to have others in the room like Brian to just get a sequence and a chronology of events, because you guys, young blokes, won't realise that as you get older, things sort of blur into one, and the story's right, but the timing or sequence might be a little bit out. So Brian might be able to add to that as we get any questions. So please fire away.
I think your memory's pretty good there, boss. You are younger than me, but yes, you are correct. The timing lines that he told us is pretty well on the money. And all the things he talks about preparation, on the money. I mean, we'd spent a good year together, even before we were going to go to Rwanda. And we'd been in New Zealand. Captain Carter was in New Zealand with us, and the company really bonded in New Zealand, mainly because we were frustrated with our CSM, but it was a good trip to build an excellent rifle company. And that's why we performed the way we did, I think. That's right, sir. Yeah,
and I think that's a good point there Buzz makes about the CSM, and I'm sure you've reflected on it since, mate. But the CSM we had at the time was a hard man, and he was. There was only black and white with him. There was a right and wrong, and it was the way Al saw things. That's how he saw things, and he demanded a lot of his junior NCOs, and he was very, very critical of performance of junior NCOs and junior officers, but certainly junior NCOs, and he rode the section commanders hard. But having said all that, I think, and I think you'll probably agree with me, Buzz, in reflection that in the long run, the CSM's hard, tough standards were things that people responded to, as frustrating as they may have been at times. He did demand and did draw the best out of the junior NCOs and senior NCOs within the call sign, and he was a pillar of strength for the OC there as well. So, all types are needed in building that team, and all types work.
And I mean, when I think about Alan, and he's a good friend of mine now. I see him quite often. He was my RSM when I was in 1R as well. He changed. When we deployed, he was a different man, and he would come and talk to section commanders all the time. He'd bring the OC down, and those two men together were one of the best command teams I've ever seen in my life. If he hadn't have been the man he was the years before we deployed, we would not have been the same organisation we were when we did deploy. And I have the utmost respect for that man. And my view of him was very, very different come the 25th of April, 1995, without a doubt.
Yeah, I agree completely, mate. And look, I think another great point Buzz makes there is that we were a team of teams, and that was promoted and really, really fostered within that command atmosphere that the OC and CSM established. Leading up, they train hard, fight easy, and that was. The OC was always a bit of a character, but he was very demanding on his young officers particularly. But I had the same. I had very fond memories of both positive and negative learning experiences with both those individuals, and mentoring sessions where the OC was able to point out my wrongs or my strengths and focus me towards those. But the CSM was able to do that from a senior soldier perspective too, and he often did. He'd come and talk about, just things that he'd seen done well in the past and done not so well, and tips for young players. And that was a great experience to have that, him in the organisation. And it was as I said, a very positive, demanding but positive command atmosphere.
But I think Colonel Tilbrook's talked enough. There must be hundreds of questions. You've got to have some questions for him. The connection's great, so let's use the opportunity to ask him some questions.
All right, come up to the microphone, please.
Hey sir, Sergeant Perkins from 1RAR. So just touching on that point, so when I first joined in 2002, I was lucky enough to have the same platoon for 2 years straight, so we got to build that good rapport and that good teamwork. By 2010, you had a separate section for most exercises. I think now we've had 5 battalion reorgs in the last 12 months. So with the average soldier career length these days being 4 years at best, How do you see Army addressing that challenge of building that sort of deep knowledge and getting Mission Command to sort of go forward when you can't build those relationships and continue that trust?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, mate. And look, it's not to say that we didn't have some of that chop and churn. We were just sort of ring fenced, particularly in 4 Platoon for some reason. But yeah, at the time there was that coming and going, and particularly with the rotation of the readiness groups. But great question, mate. I appreciate you've lived a similar experience, and the current environment is really really difficult to manage that. I think if any of you have seen General Burr's latest webinar, he talks specifically towards some of those issues you've just raised, Sarge, and it's around slowing the tempo, being comfortable that we can let things go, and focus on other things at the expense of some other pieces. I think that's an acknowledgement from the Chief of Army that this is something that needs to happen. I've seen it previously in my time as a company commander, and then even across as my time as a CO. Teams are having to rebuild on the fly continually. It's difficult to get those long periods of time together and multiple training opportunities together. I guess what we need to all do is knuckle down and do is what the Chief is talking to us about, and start enforcing that reduction in tempo. But there's other things I think that we can do to mitigate some of that as well, and that's really a real focus at all levels. It is more readily able to transfer individuals from small team to small team, and be gripped up into that small team rapidly. But yeah, it's a really interesting question, mate, and slowing the flow and getting the basics really right, it goes some way to doing that. But we've got to be focused across the board as an organisation and understand the importance of maintaining small teams together for longer periods of time. I hope that gets a little bit of what you're saying, mate. I haven't got a full answer for you, but it is one that we all need to continue to focus on.
Okay.
G'day, sir. You spoke about medical and legal. Army and 3 Brigade are really about combined arms and combat teaming. What, if any, supporting elements do you think could have assisted you in that deployment to Rwanda? And was it discussed back then in getting any of those elements?
Yeah, mate, a great question again. So to stay up there, I can watch your face as I'm answering and see if I get it right. So a great question, mate, and a great point. None of us do this in isolation. None of us should be doing this in isolation. We're not built or designed or equipped to do it in isolation, and it takes a combined arms team to get best effect out of anything that we're going after. Absolutely, force structure and force protection are a much more prevalent consideration now than they were when we deployed to Rwanda. And I like to think that some of the lessons and post operational reports that came out of Rwanda may have some way affected that, along with ROE and chapters that we get committed towards within the UN. So absolutely, if I was to look at the situation we went into now as a planner and design a force that would go and do the same job, it'd look a lot different to what we sent across there in 1995. I can guarantee you that. There'd be a greater emphasis on force protection, on force structure that is able to respond to the threat that may present itself, and then on mobility and communications. There's a whole piece there that we were literally in the dark and operating on a wing and a prayer. We were moving around the most highly mined country on the face of the planet at the time in light-skinned 60 vehicles, and our force protection measure was to throw 2 lines of sandbags on the floor the tray, and that was it. Lads were in the back seat, literally on wooden seats with no seat belts. We jerry-rigged gun mounts out the side of the vehicle so that we could put the minimi out for some element of force protection. And unfortunately, we had a four-car section from B Squadron join us that were underutilised because everyone was scared to use them because of the optics around it and rolling out a hardened vehicle. We've come a long way since then. The kit that we're operating with now would make a complete change straight up. But, the force element and the force structure and the force protection that would be put into that now would put us in a lot different position and potentially open up different decision-making processes as well. To do the job, we went in under a Chapter 6 UN mandate, which is very restrictive on offensive operations anyway. I think, in hindsight, people would have insisted on a Chapter 7 now, which was what we have done post that, and particularly into Interfet and onto the UN mission there. And then having the assets and the resources to respond in a more positive way, rather than having young soldiers in World War II, in Vietnam vintage flak jackets, presenting themselves in front of an individual who's shooting on unarmed populations and putting themselves in between them. We wouldn't have to do that if we had the right kit and the right force structure, mate. So, it's a great question and a great consideration. And I think we're much better set now as an army. We're better set right through that decision-making process around deployments, and we're better set with the kit and the training that the lads are getting with that kit. So hopefully that answered your question there, but you're spot on, mate. Everyone has a role in it, and everyone would value add to it in the combined arms team sense.
I suppose I'd add, we were a combined arms company. We had an engineer section. They did a lot of stuff. We had the carriers. They were manned by 5/7 RAR soldiers that stage because they did a rotation. Me thinking back to that particular day, what would I have liked to have seen? We were relying on a HF comm set. I would have liked to have seen some better communications. That was the thing that scared me the most that day, was that comms. Sid Quinn did the best job in the world. He maintained comms all day long. But yeah, a better comms det to deploy that far south would have been really handy, I thought. And I did a lot of missions outside Kigali, not just this one. And all we had was a HF whip antenna or some dipoles that we'd set up. And comms was always the thing that worried me the most. Whenever the boss or the OC would say, hey, you're going on a task, this is how far you're going. And I'd always ask about comms. So, yeah. But we learnt so much. I think the Army learnt so much out of those early deployments in the 90s to Somalia, Rwanda, Cambodia. We learned a lot about how we should deploy properly. So, yeah, we're in a much better position than we were back then.
Yeah, that was a follow-on question I had. It was, what kind of reporting were you sending higher, and how was that received and reacted to from the OC?
Can you repeat that, please, Brian, or through you, mate, please? Here we go.
Yeah, sorry, me again. What kind of reporting were you sending higher, and how was that received and reacted to by your higher headquarters?
Yeah, so normal reports and returns, mate. We used to rely on them a little more heavily in those days. But so on top of those, it was on occurrence. We're sending sit reps and updates. But as Brian outlined, the comms were difficult all day. I came to the next or the whole deployment, in fact. But I came to understand later that all of the battle captains that were on duty were called in on duty so that they could all sit in the comms room and try and decipher some of the message because it was so garbled coming through. I was keeping them abreast of how the situation was developing. I was giving continual updates on the situation as it developed around the security piece, and I continued to update. The CO at times came straight on. I was talking straight to Nina. It it got to a point though that comms were unworkable there for a period. You know, the last message before we lost comms for a period of time there from the CEO was that he was confident in the decisions that I was making, and that he'd get to us as soon as we can. We didn't know when that would be. So it was really just about keeping them abreast of where we were at and what I was thinking, and right up until the point that we lost comms at that time, you know, I still was confident that our position was tenable, that we had options, and that we still had an extraction plan in place that we could use if needed.
You spoke about the importance of time spent forming the team, and it sounds like over there you're putting out a lot of spot fires as they were happening. Were there any specific critical training that the soldiers received prior to the deployment that really helped, or anything that you think could have helped prior to deployment that you may have conducted?
Yeah, another great question. Look, I think, you know, on top of the tough training program and exercise program that we did undertake, we did a very limited force preparation piece and mission-specific training. There was none of that in those days. That's something that's been evolved over time, and I think that, you know, it got a bit too far developed there a few years ago, and it came back off a little bit. The last time I went through it in 2019, I think we were pretty much on the board for it. So that's a great add. I think, you know, if we had that in hindsight, if we had an opportunity to have concentrated the whole element to go through some scenarios and response and training in that environment, in a controlled environment overseen by a brilliant organisation like CTC, that would have been, you know, that would have put us in even better stead. But we didn't have that, and I think again that's something that we've learnt over time, and it's a great add. For the soldiers specifically, I would say that great training and tough exercise regime that we were in presented opportunities for them to operate individually, and in fact the section commanders always looked for opportunities for individuals to step up and take the lead in different activities. I can clearly recall one such occasion on a Swift Eagle up in Weipa the year before, where we had a task as an enemy activity to infiltrate the town of Weipa and seize the Humbug Wharf. And I think, you know, Brian will remember this clearly, but we didn't have anything. We were dropped about 100 k's out from the town, and we're told to get in there and do the serial. And we made a decision as a group, trusting the skill sets of the individual soldiers, to break up into groups of two with no communications, and give that sort of responsibility to the individual soldiers in those small team groups to move themselves and infiltrate, and then into a predetermined RV where we would reset as a platoon to undertake the platoon activity that we'd been given. And, you know, there's a lot of risk associated with that. And today, perhaps it wouldn't pass the 60 minutes test, but it could if you did the right work. And you know, that responsibility was put back on each and every soldier. They were all expected to be responsible enough to do and undertake actions on their own. And as something as significant as a night move as well across, you know, 30 or 40 kilometre infill route, to do an RV at a predisposed RV point, you know, that sort of stuff really brought them along. But, yeah, and the other pieces were any chance we had to get, you know, brilliant at the basics. We did a lot of shooting. We did a lot of field craft work. We didn't have a lot of resources in those days either, or even, you know, it was quite limited. Even as an online battalion, you'd get to fight for them. But there was other things that were able to be done. And each section commander, you know, might pay lip service to it a little bit, but these guys did. They had soldiers' fives that were in their Buey Tui in their back pocket, and any opportunity to continue to work on that. You know, there's a lot of work done around the private P proficiency, and then we also had ODF, RDF proficiency requirements there as well that were tested regularly. So, you know, all of that added to preparing that. Yeah, everyone in the corps signed the right way. I guess the other thing I'd say is that often I've run into over the last few years that checking is micromanaging. That's something that I hate to hear. Checking is not micromanaging. Checking is good leadership, and it's an assurance that standards are being set and met. And that's something that I think that was done very well across the board as well. There was an understanding of what the standard was, and it was checked, and it was checked regularly, and that was just part of doing business. It wasn't individuals feeling as though someone was looking in their pack too often or looking at their skill sets too often. It was about, hey, there's standards there, you know what it is, I'm going to check and make sure you meet it.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
Did we think there were deficiencies in our training? Is that right?
Yeah, do you think there was anything that could have assisted?
Yeah. Well, when I reflect back as a section commander, what Colonel Tilbrook was saying is 100% correct. I mean, when I look at the brigade today, you have opportunities that we didn't have, but there are similar. There's a lot of similarity between the brigade in 1995 and today, to be quite honest with you. So we did Maxi Beagle and Swift Eagle. You do a Warfighter, you do Tails and Sabre. The big opportunities are there, but you got, as a section commander, you have to take every opportunity you're given to train. You can't sit back and think you're trained, because you're never trained. You've always got to train. Every opportunity you're presented with, you have to make the most of it. If I could go back to 1995 or 1994, what would I do? I'd do more first aid training. I mean, we were trained in first aid. I knew how to treat second chest wound. I knew how to treat hemorrhage. I knew how to treat broken legs. I could put a tourniquet on. I didn't have a tourniquet. I was taught how to do it with a sling. But I wish I had more training. And I wish my section had more training. In Rwanda, we spent, some of our rotation was the task of the hospital, the security of the hospital. There was the front gate of the hospital above the dental unit, and there was a back gate near the morgue and the surgery. And then the third task at the hospital for the rest section was to be orderlies. And you were working in resus, you were working in the operating theatre, you were working in ICU, or you were bashing Dixies. No one liked to bash Dixies, but every soldier wanted to work in ICU because they were taught skills in there that were very, very useful for us. A lot of guys like to work in the operating theatre. I don't know why, I didn't particularly enjoy it. You did a lot of stuff in the operating theatre that was you were not trained as an infantry soldier to do, but you were learning things all the time. That rotation we did just before going to Caballo was actually quite handy. But first aid training was the one thing I don't think we were good at. Everything else I think we were really good at. We were good at shooting, we were good at navigation, we were confident in our decision-making processes. Our signalers were excellent communicators. My driver was an excellent driver. He knew how to maintain our vehicle. He knew how to get us across most routes, except when they were piled high 12 with bodies. That was the only thing he couldn't handle, but we were trained well. First aid training is what I'd love to have been better at. That'd be my point.
And I'll just add to that, I think just one is that you've got to give time for people to train, and that's a consideration. So as Buzz pointed out there, the sections took every opportunity and as a platoon commander and then as a company commander or CSM or platoon sergeant, you need to allow your call sign time to do that. So, not everything needs to be a company activity. Not everything needs to be a platoon activity. You need to give time for the section commanders and the group commanders to do their own stuff as well, and that's really important.
Hey, sir, Sergeant Perkins again. Just wanted to touch on, based on what you were saying, you didn't feel like you were directly threatened by the Rwandan forces while you're there, but during the time when those sort of first massacre was occurring, when the refugees were trying to escape, how did you cope personally and across your team and sort of debrief afterwards, given your limited ROE and the scope of your mission was obviously there to protect the medical personnel and not to protect the refugees? How did you sort of cope with that, and do you have any instances within your team where people were looking to go outside of their ROE to pretty much stop the massacre from occurring, but then obviously putting your own team at risk?
Yeah, so mate, it's a great question. It's one that's been pulled apart by academics for the last 20 plus years. So it's whilst I said it wasn't direct threats from the RPA initially, that did change, and there was threatening posture, and in fact we did we were fired upon by them a number of times and got in between the crossfire between them and the Interahamwe a number of times. So, you know, that position did change significantly. You know, I've maintained for a long time, mate, that the ROE that we had allowed us to respond. It allowed us to respond. There was sufficient enough threat there that we could have opened fire on any number of parties. However, the situation didn't allow it to occur. You got to understand, we on the ground, I had Brian Buskell's section. I had a small SAS team that had come in as a medical support element that had been flown in on one of the last helos, 3 blokes. I had a medical team, a SIG and a couple of drivers. And there was upwards of 2 regiments of RPA surrounding us in that camp. And there was any untold number of Interahamwe that were operating in and out of the camp. So we were significantly outmatched. And I knew that, and I knew that pretty clearly. Dolly Roach used to say that, yeah, he gave the order for us to not fire. I don't recall that. I always left it open on the ground as to individuals making that assessment. If they needed to, they could. But I knew that if we did, you'd be probably memorialising all of us right now. We wouldn't have won that fight. We would have given it a bloody good crack, but we wouldn't have won that fight. So that it gets back to, you know, the ROE being the right ROE and the force structures and whatnot being correct. But it's to say how does that absolutely, you know, to a man in that group, the frustrations and the mixed emotions around. Mostly in reflection times after the incident, it's been very difficult. It's caused any number of psychological issues for the members participating down there. We've lost a lot of good men to psychological issues, and those psych issues are going on to this day. And that's wrestling with the thought of being perhaps restricted or not being able to do what could have been or should have been done. But I'll challenge anyone to that. To a man, every one of those individuals on the ground that day did everything they possibly could to negate the situation. I sort of mentioned it before. We didn't get into too many details, but I saw every one of my team expose themselves to stop things that were going on just through bluff. Through putting themselves between individuals who are firing on unarmed civilians and firing back into groups of people who had Interahamwe tied into them. I saw them do that, expose themselves, move into the area and stop that firing occur. I saw them huddle over injured individuals and protect them from others. I saw them disarm individuals when they got the opportunity to do that. We did use escalation of force where we could. And shots were fired from the compound, albeit but not from our guys, from the Zambians that were in location, and potentially mostly not when we were there. But the bayonet was used. We didn't have batons or proper equipment in those days. We used to carry around big hunks of hose and fill them sand and other sticks that the boys had fashioned into people control tools. They were used, but they, to a man, appreciated the situation and understood the seriousness of that next escalation. So we did at times get an instant and draw a sight picture on individuals, but that went along with a warning and with more bluff as someone else approached and walked forward and moved them on. But it's been difficult. It has been difficult, and an individual response to it has been difficult to manage, mate. You know, I'm very comfortable with the decisions I made there. I'm very comfortable with every action of the individuals who are involved over there. And any opportunity I do get to speak to any of them, I reaffirm that with them. I guess the other piece was there was none of the psych support that you see today in place either. And on the post the incident, most of the debriefing was done amongst ourselves, and we were very fortunate to have a great padre it's always a great asset in a unit, and we had a fantastic senior nursing officer, and she had done some critical incident counselling work, and Mary Brandy and the padre at the time came up and sat down with the lads, and we did a full debrief in that sort of environment. And I think the goodness of doing that was that both Mary and the padre, the lads, all of us, including myself, saw them as part of our team. They'd been walking the same ground as us. They'd done the lead up with us. They'd deployed together, and it was a very, open, honest debrief that was conducted in that environment. So much so that when a psych team was eventually pushed forward to do a debrief with the team, most of the lads didn't want to talk to them because they'd already done their talking with Mary and the padre and the rest of the lads. But that was made available to them at the time, but it was all still very new and developing. The systems we've got in place now are, again, far better developed and I think, far more appropriate. Post the activity, I think the worst thing we ever did was break the platoon up and break the company up. And that's a natural flow of any battalion. But I think if we had been able to keep the team together for another training turn, another year, I think we would have probably caught a lot of the issues in the right vein and been able to sort them out better. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We got broken up pretty much to the four winds, and you move onward and upward. But that's the one regret, that if I could have influenced more heavily, I would have insisted. And I didn't have the power to do that at that stage, but it's something that I would consider very strongly now, and in keeping a team together post a deployment like that, just for a training turn, just so everyone can keep an eye on each other. But Buzz, I don't know if you've got anything else you add on that, mate.
I suppose, so there's two parts to your question, wasn't there? There was the part about the debrief, and what was the other part, sorry, mate?
First part was just, from the threat point, did you ever think to...
Yeah, so the ROE was, I don't know what people do know about the ROE, but it was quite open. I could protect the soldier standing next to me, I could protect the UN guy working with me, and I could protect the IDP. I made a conscious decision. Oh, so go back one, sorry. When we got in Cabello 2, we were at load. We were only at load. I took them to action, and I took a couple of guys to instant. A couple of guys went to instance. We fixed bayonets a lot that day. Well, we fixed bayonets once and left them on all day. We used our bayonets quite effectively. We used our butt of our rifle very effectively. And yeah, we were shot at, but I knew if I had have gave a fire control order, I would not be standing here today, I'd not be a father. I knew that. Maybe I knew it from reading a lot of history, maybe I knew it from talking to my dad who was a World War II veteran, maybe I knew it from talking with the boss and platoon sergeant about being a soldier. But had we opened fire, we'd all be dead. And countless more refugees would be dead as well. I mean, I don't know if you know how many people died in that refugee camp, but the other section commander, myself, Jake Blake, we stopped counting at 4,500 with our counter. We stopped counting at 4,500 refugees. I know there was so many more, okay? So yeah, the ROE was good enough for us to do our job, but I made a pretty conscious decision not to give a fire control order that day. I gave a few orders to butt stroke some people, and I physically told my soldiers to go and stand over there at times, and I knew what that could result in. But that's what we needed to do. The debrief thing, it was really interesting. I remember getting back, I remember getting all of our kit stripped off us, having these showers, hot showers for the first time because our showers weren't hot. I remember having a crap breakfast. I remember getting told we can go to bed, but we've got to get up at dawn because it's Anzac Day, and I was frustrated. I remember getting told, hey, after Anzac Day, you're going on guard on the front gate, and I was frustrated again because all I wanted to do was go to sleep. But that night, we were taken up into the mess, the officers' mess, and yes, there was an officers' mess where they sold drinks over in Rwanda, and we were debriefed, and it was a section, it was platoon commander, Sig Quinn was with us. I don't remember the name of the nurse, but the boss does. The padre was there, and we just had a discussion about what we'd been through in the last week. And it was very, very open. Some of the guys thought, I remember walking up there, one of the guys, Jason Honeyman, was saying, hey, I'm not going to say anything, I don't want to embarrass myself. I said, what are you got to be embarrassed about, mate? There's nothing to be embarrassed about because I do not regret a single decision I made that day. I don't second guess a single decision I made that day because I know I did the right thing. And I know every one of those soldiers and the boss and Sig Quinn and Captain Vaughan Evans' crew all made the right decisions because we're all alive. So yeah, it was the best debrief I've ever had. But the debriefs we had now are really good too. So yeah, that's all I've got to say about that.
Thanks very much, sir.
All right, so Sergeant Perkins stole the question I was going to ask. I was going to ask it in a different way. We've got time for one more question and I'm going to pose it. So, what were you most afraid of on the 22nd of April 1995? And what did it feel like? And how did you conquer your fear?
Yeah, good. It's a really good question, Tom. I think above all, what I feared the most through the whole deployment, but specifically on the 22nd, was losing a soldier. Because we were thin, and I knew the situation was critical. I knew our lads would be responding the right way, but there was events there that you just can't control. And so, I guess the most concern there was around that. I knew what our response to that would be, and as Brian just spoke to, I knew what the outcome of that would be. So as a call sign, but that didn't worry me. We had a plan, and we had a plan that if we were going to make that final call, we knew how we were going to do it, and we knew that we'd do it to the best of our ability, and then hopefully someone would probably write about it later. But so there was more about that an individual, in my call sign or those in the care that we'd been put there to place, I think was the greatest fear. But again, I think that's a very individual thing, Tom. I haven't talked to others around it. That there's different emotions set with that. I was not a married man at the time, and I didn't have children. I think that had changed things. That there might have been some more fear about perhaps, not seeing them again or not having an opportunity around that. But I didn't ever fear any failure. I didn't fear making a decision. I didn't fear that we weren't doing the right thing. I just, there was that piece around, just not being able to affect an individual situation at a certain place in time where I might have might lose a soldier. But I guess what I focused on was different activities, and what was the most critical thing that needed doing at the time, and that changed through the day many times. I guess that gets the first one. Can you just hit the second part of that question again, Tom? It's sort of slipped out now.
So thanks for your great response, Steve. I was thinking throughout presentations in the years since we were lieutenants that I wonder what such and such was most afraid of. So now I've heard your great response to that. I can stop wondering about you and start wondering about other people. But the second part was how you actually conquer the fear. You said that you were busy doing stuff. So I guess you've answered that, unless you've got more to offer.
Yeah, look, I think it's about doing that, mate. It's about really focusing on the priority that you've got right in front of you, and the fear doesn't go away. I don't think that went away. I can't recall ever fearing for my own self. I knew that I was making some decisions and doing some stuff, and all of the team were probably well worth a consideration around that, but it stayed there. But just staying focused on the task at hand and getting to where it needs to be. I will say that once the team, the relief team, did get down to us, and I think it was probably across the board, but this is a very personal reflection. Once the company TIC got down there, Twit McMahon arrived with some additional FE and capacity. It sort of allowed us to stand off the task a little bit. This is some days later, the 24th-ish and then relieved. But when I did stop, I sat down and I can't recall, and I think Quinn was one of them, and there was a couple of other fellas sitting with me, and we made a brew. And it was the first hot brew that we'd had for some time in location there. And I had my own smokes this day, mate. I lit a cigarette and sat down and actually sat down and had a hot brew. And that's when then, my physical reaction commenced. And I there was a shake. I was, it's like an adrenaline dump had come off, and it was just it was only for 20 minutes. It happened, and I took that time just to have a hot brew and a durry, and then I was right again, and we were back onto the next task, which was getting back to Caballo. But it wasn't. I didn't consciously have to tackle the fear. It was there. I knew there's, if it was going to happen, I probably didn't have anything. I couldn't do anything about it if it was going to happen. It was about how we would react and about how we could act before that to try and to limit that.
Amazing. All right, so that's all we got time for this lecture. So on behalf of the audience here, which includes junior officers, junior NCOs and senior NCOs, I'd like to thank you for availing yourself and talking about the events of 20-something years ago and doing so in such a massively emotional yet informative way. We've had many discussions over the years, and I was hoping for this lecture to go off like it did. So thanks for giving of yourself and educating us, and in time educating viewers on the Cove about these events that happened a long time ago, because we've recently deployed the Ready Combat Team from 1 RAR to Afghanistan to conduct a non-combatant evacuation operation. And you were right, there's differences, but essentially 3 Brigade is similar to our time in the early 90s here. Certainly their deployment was into a scene reminiscent of what you encountered at Caballo and Kigali and all the other places in Rwanda and all the other places you've served in operationally since. And I remember thinking back, I haven't caught up with the lieutenants from that outfit, but I want to compare the experiences that you had compared to the experiences they had in similar situations. On behalf of the audience, thanks for forearming us with knowledge if we're yet to experience operational deployment. It's something that you can only prepare for, and then when you're actually there, you probably know all about it, and you've gone a long way towards educating us in that. So on behalf of the audience, I'd like you to thank Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Stephen Tilbrook, MG, and my wife, Dr. Narelle Biederman, and the Brigade RSM Warrants Class 1 bus.